to Unabashedly Resolute, and this is the second segment of tonight's topic, discussing the differences between the terms liberal and conservative. And starting out the second half, we actually have my stepbrother, Nathan Roberto. He's in, is it Minnesota?
No, Kalispell, Montana.
Say, what is it?
Kalispell, Montana.
Montana. I knew it started with an M.
That's where the cattle are 2-1 to people, right?
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
So it's Montana. He just moved out there with his wife. And, you know, Nathan, he grew up in North Carolina along with me. And we've known each other for quite a while. And he's somebody that I have a lot of respect for. And, you know, he represents a different view than I hold. But he represents it well, and he's somebody who is extremely passionate about what he believes. Many of the jobs that he's held actually reflect the position that he holds politically as well. And so it's an honor to have him talking with us tonight. And I'll just say, you know, the goal of this interview is not to get into a heated argument. It's not to bash anyone. At least live. We'll do that later on. We'll call him back and we'll bash him then.
Just don't call back.
Yeah, just but the whole goal is to have someone who fully represents one side of the argument, and we want them to accurately state what they actually believe. And we want to ask a few questions that help them get to the heart of it. So, Nathan, if you don't mind, we're just going to ask you a few questions, and you can just respond in complete honesty.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the introduction.
No problem at all. So the first question I want to ask, I know you come from a very liberal perspective and background, and you told me as well that you would probably even consider yourself to be even further left than the average liberal, which is totally fine for tonight's discussion. But I'd like to know how would you sum up your political view from an economic and from a social context?
Okay. Well, you know, I guess I would say economically and socially, those two aspects have really been influenced by, you know, my personal experiences as an individual that's grown up in public housing and poverty. I think that I've come to understand how I believe the system to be inherently flawed, and how it is an economy based off of a class system. And the antagonisms between classes, I would say three sort of the social antagonisms that we have now that I think have manifested into racism and homophobia, and that we basically see and feel, especially with the Black Lives Matter group, and with, you know, for example, Sandra Bland out of Carr in Texas, and Dyer, jail cell, and how I think that events translate into the political system. For me, my political views anyway, is that I would consider myself more of a social activist than a party member. I think the parties are pretty entrenched in their views, and in a lot of ways they're similar, and in some ways they're very dissimilar, as you pointed out, with some of the social issues. I think when you gave the definition in the beginning, I think the only thing that I would have, that I would contend in those definitions is that you said that conservatives are self-empowerment. I would argue that so is the liberal side. I think that we have this assumption that because liberals are for government spending and for social welfare, that they're just supporting people that don't have the willpower to support themselves. when what people are really asking for is a hand up, not a hand out. So that in that sense, social programs have generally been used to help alleviate poverty, not to keep people on the system. And also, I think you said that conservatives are for free markets, and I think just the same that liberals, I'd say most liberals are for free market and for capitalism. I don't think that they're anti-capitalist just because they advocate for social spending doesn't mean that they're socialists or communists. So yeah.
Well, I think those are, thank you for clarifying some of those things there. Yeah, because anytime that somebody else, that's one reason we would have you on, Nathan, is because even as objectively as I would try to be from the other side, there's still going to be a little bit of my filter that may not be able to see it correctly. So I would try my best to disengage myself from the conservative view and go, okay, let's go to the liberal side and see if we can explain it correctly. But I don't know if I can ever get it exactly correct there. But yeah, there was a few things that I had that I wanted to ask about. And one was, let me start. Look at my notes here, because I can read my own handwriting. You said the system was inherently flawed. And in what way is the system inherently flawed? And what part of the system are we talking about?
Well, I'd say the economic system. I mean, to be quite honest, I don't believe that the capitalist system is a fair system, and that it's a system where anyone can rise to make their own, their dreams come true, to rise above poverty. I think we've seen that sort of with individuals, that's very well possible. But when we look at a larger scale, we could look at like a state scale, even like a city scale, and see sort of the disparities in income between, my hometown, for instance, Greensboro, North Carolina. We look at West Greensboro that is predominantly white, and then we look at East Greensboro that is predominantly black. And the statistics show the average median income is double that for white people in Greensboro on the west side. It's like, I think it's like 50,000, and then on the east side it's 25,000. So there are a lot of factors that come into that. The historical sort of situation in town where segregation, although it ended legally, it sort of left its roots in sort of the culture of the city. And I would argue that all these things came about from the beginning of capitalism. I think capitalism bred slavery, and in its modern form, it breeds another type of antagonism between classes, between the middle and the bottom, and particularly between the upper class and lower.
So what I'm hearing is more of a collectivism versus individualism. Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, so collectivism is you're looking at a collective of people, and you were saying this is so we need to judge society on the collective rather than on the individual experience. We look at the collective. So we're looking at blacks, whites, Hispanics, gays, straight, Christian, non-Christian, atheists. We look at them, we judge them as collectives rather than as individuals. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're asking me for my assessment of, my understanding of the economy and how it works, I would say that's my understanding that it has to be a collective sort of picture, because it doesn't really operate on a system of individuals. I mean, that's kind of I think that's the idealism behind it, that we are all individuals and we make our own path and our own sort of prosperity. but prosperity is tied to another person's labor. I mean, I think it's all connected, sort of, to the bigger picture.
Well, so I get what you're saying. The one thing that strikes me is you said that about segregation, that we still segregate. That's seen. And I believe you would say that's systemic across the United States. There's segregation, but yet if we judge culture based on collectivism, aren't we grouping them into segregated units and then judging them based on those things? Or that's an honest question. I don't understand collectivism and segregation and how and where you draw those lines and parse those out and say, well, one is good and one is bad. Could you help me out with
I
that?
don't understand your question. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, because you said earlier that the segregation of the communities, we got rid of segregation back in the 60s and 70s, but you say you're still seeing it today. You're still seeing that. But as educators and as government comes through, they judge us or group us into segregated things, and they judge us by white, black, and gay, straight, and all those. So they, in turn, the people who are teaching us about economics and social issues are also judging us and saying we judge you as a collective, which to me segregates us into those individuals, and we get judged based on the segregation part of it. Instead of me judged as an individual being responsible for my own actions, I'm judged with my collective, which segregates me against my other fellow U.S. citizens. So I've always struggled with that. Could you clarify some of that with me?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I guess what I would say to that is, if I think I'm understanding correctly, is we have to acknowledge these differences, particularly with all the stuff that's going on right now with the police and the black communities. I think we have to give that light because the circumstances are different. I mean, I guess if you want to call it segregation, you can, but I think it's a diverse sort of historical circumstances that African Americans have been put into. Like segregation ended in the 60s, but there's a continual sort of cultural, political, social situation that has left the minority community out of mainstream white America. It's the same thing that you and I sort of enjoy on a daily basis, sort of the things that I sometimes take for granted. So I think yeah, we have to give that a special context because that's a way of sort of analyzing it in my mind.
Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate those responses. Another question for you is, any of us that claim anything as being the right way of thinking, it begs the question, why? Why is it that you believe that that's the right thing to believe? And ultimately, what's the basis for it? And so I'm curious what your response is from an ultra-liberal, radical liberal perspective. What would you base your primary beliefs on?
Let's say my primary beliefs are based off of history, science, and just material life. I think that those things have laid sort of the root in my understanding. But I guess in particular experience, my own experience with poverty and sort of injustice, exposure to different sort of lifestyles is key, and then knowledge. Second, I think building sort of your knowledge around your experiences and putting your experience into context and making sense of that. And the third, I would say, practice, putting your experience, your knowledge into, a daily sort of practice where you combine your understanding of the world with your daily activities to, try to create the world that you want.
Is there, if someone disagrees with your positions, do you have room in your liberal thinking to coexist with them inside of the United States, inside of laws and inside of the Constitution, inside of these things? So if I disagree with, if I say I disagree with homosexual marriage and I believe traditional marriage is the way, is it okay for us to coexist without me being considered, this term is inciting, but just because I've heard this before, is it okay for me to disagree without being considered a monster or a horrible person?
No, I wouldn't consider you a monster or a horrible person. I would try to convince you that I'm right. But,
well, yeah.
Of course, there's space for both views, and I imagine there always will be. I guess when the day comes when there's not, then democracy has failed us. So I would say that I hope that competing views are always an aspect of our daily lives.
So on that competing views, I want to get this as a question off the cuff, so I hope I don't step on John's toes here. What do you think about safe spaces on college campuses?
I don't know what safe spaces are. Can you tell me?
Okay, so what we see is a lot of college campuses now who restrict the free speech and restrict what can be said on the college campus. So basically, if you disagree with them, then you can't speak or you can't hold anything public, and if you do, it's pretty much you have a professor that's out there trying to shut things down, and they're saying it needs to be a safe space where our views can be held without contestation. And this is all over the United States. You're seeing this in colleges.
Free speech areas.
Well, they're called safe zones now because they're no longer free speech zones. Because you're not allowed to have free speech, you have to have a view that corresponds with whoever is in charge of those. So you're saying that we should be able to disagree, but we should try to convince one another that we're right, and whoever has the best evidence, it should be, saying, okay, this view is probably more correct than the other view. But what I'm seeing across the nation is I'm seeing that opposing views are not welcome, and they're also shut down, and you're not allowed to speak these. If you do, you're wrong. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm not familiar with the safe zone, but let's see, I graduated college in 2009, and I remember my experience being a place, a college campus where there were a lot of competing views. So I can't imagine. I would have to look more into that to give you an opinion, but I would say if they're restricting free speech, I would say that would be unconstitutional, especially if it's a public university. I guess if it's a private university, maybe it might be a different...
Yeah, these are public universities.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, it sounds like it would be unconstitutional, but I kind of remember this traveling group of pro-lifers who would set up these, like graphic images of abortions on college campuses across North Carolina. And they would actually rope off the area, and, they would have the delegates kind of out front of the billboard so you could come and talk to them about specific issues that you're concerned about. And those often, that was, tense confrontation between people on the left and right in those spaces. And I don't know if they still do that or not, but I remember that happening, and it continued to happen, so I don't see why that would be an issue.
Yeah, they stopped allowing free speech. There was a guy handing out constitutions on Constitution Day in the free speech zone, and he got arrested. It was just some bizarre things. But yeah, so go ahead, John.
Yes, so we want to kind of wrap up this part, but one last question for you. Sorry, we are live, so we have some sirens going on in the background. But one question for you to kind of end it. From a liberal perspective, if you were going to ask some key questions that would possibly challenge the perspective of a conservative point of view, what would a couple of those questions be?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I've thought about that, and I don't know, I'm real happy. Do you have any more questions for me?
That was my last one.
Yeah. I mean, just based off our conversation, do you have any more questions for me that you just kind of thought about in the last few minutes?
Well, I did want to, because you mentioned growing up in public housing and poverty, and I grew up in not too far away in southeastern Ohio, and it's a huge socioeconomically depleted area. Lots of people on government assistance. Myself was on food stamps several times growing up because the plant my dad worked at went on strike. We were in an economically depressed area. And you mentioned, the poverty and the handout and those sorts of things. My question would be, there's statistical analysis that says since America has declared the war on poverty, that we've actually become more impoverished and more ingrained in poverty than we were before, when poverty was left up, not to the government, it was left up to individuals to help their neighbors instead of having it go through a government system and bureaucratic system. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I guess I would say I don't think that's a consequence of the war on poverty. I think that would be a consequence of sort of like the general economic trends since then, since the 70s. I think when Johnson declared the war on poverty, that was like at the height of the Vietnam War, or actually I guess before the height of the Vietnam War, and particularly when the civil rights movement was gaining steam, and so I think he and the government were trying to address the disparities, and when Vietnam got ramped up, that sort of the war on poverty came to an end, essentially, because all that money got converted to Vietnam. So, but I don't think that social welfare programs have been around since the 30s, since the Depression, and I think since the 80s they took a hard hit, especially when Reagan became president. So yeah, I don't think that the war on poverty has any sort of application to that trend.
All right, I have two other questions. One is extremely important. From North Carolina, Blue Devil, Tar Heel.
Neither.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other question just slipped my mind, so you're off the hook.
Okay.
Nathan, we really appreciate your time and for giving us
Absolutely.
your valuable input, and I'm sure we'll be talking very shortly.
Oh, wait. Now I have a real question. This is a serious question. Sanders or Clinton? Sanders, yeah. That's awesome. So you're going against the establishment. Love it. At least Bernie's, I really appreciate Bernie says what he believes, and he's honest. And I really appreciate him for doing that.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you saying that, and thanks for having me on, guys.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks,
Take
Nathan.
care, Nathan. All right, that was pretty cool. And what we wanted to show there, the main reason for us to do that was to get someone on to share their view that was not tainted at all. I use the word tainted, but was not shaded by a filter of someone who didn't hold that worldview. I wanted them to give their opinion unobstructed for me so they could give it honestly and openly. Now, what you saw there was an exchange of ideas that was done with grace, with humility and respect. We can do this, people. We can have conversations. We can have dialogue of ideas without getting into fistfights, without getting into verbal wars. And it takes us to be disciplined, to listen and understand what the other person's saying, and then ask questions. It was interesting. I used to have a real big problem talking to girls when I was younger. Didn't have a whole lot of...
Used to?
Used to, yes. I'm married now, so I do okay. But growing up, I was always afraid of women, and I didn't do very well in the dating scene until someone actually told me one time, it's easy, Wes. You ask questions and you listen. And I was like, that's brilliant. So I started asking questions and listening, and I started having dates with the most beautiful women in the world, and I happen to marry one of them, sitting right over there. Thank you. But so we can do this, guys. We can do this. We can have conversations with people that are not pointed and they're not jagged, and we can actually have an exchange of ideas. Talk about God and politics. We talked for 10, 15 minutes to somebody, ultra-liberal. I consider myself a constitutionalist and a conservative. And we had an exchange of ideas, and nobody got a verbal black eye or a physical black eye. Why? Because we had an exchange of ideas and we respected one another. We can do that in the United States. And Christians, we can speak up and we can share our views on social media. We can share our views in public. We can share our views in the public sphere. But we have to know how to do it. How do we do it? It takes discipline. You have to know what you know, and you have to understand why you think you know it, and you have to be able to defend it. And you have to do it with humility and grace.
Yeah. So, we've got a few minutes left, and what we wanted to do is take a little bit of time for Wes and I to kind of just share a little bit about our perspective on the differences between the two and the approach that we personally take. And I'll get into mine here in a minute, but I'll first let Wes get back on the mic.
So there's a question that I asked earlier. What form of government do we have? And we forgot to ask Nathan what form of government that we have. But if Nathan is still listening and he wants to text, if he wants to send it on a text message to John, what his answer is, what form of government do we have? The form of government we have in America is not a democracy. Al Sharpton learned that the hard way talking to one of the representatives from Georgia. It was Google Al Sharpton and democracy. He learns a lesson in democracy on YouTube, and you'll see the exchange. It's quite funny because a lot of people say we live in a democracy. Well, we don't live in a democracy because a democracy is majority rules. 51% of the population get whatever they want. 49% don't. We live in a constitutional republic. And they asked, it was amazing, they asked Ben Franklin as he came out of the convention there in Philadelphia, when they were considering what kind of government to have, they said, when he walked out, they said, what kind of government do we have? And he said, a republic, if we can keep it. Now, what is a republic? What's a constitutional republic? A constitutional republic is a form of government that is set up by representative government, a representative of the people who govern the people and the people have allowed that government to impose laws on them, so they are being governed by the government that they set up. Now, how is that government structured? It's set up through the Constitution. So we have the Constitution, and we have the government, the republic, so the representative government. Now, that makes for a very, very interesting thing. This is the only government ever set up like this that has worked for this long. The United States government is completely unique to the world. There are other governments that are like it, but they're not as successful. We've been around for around 300 years. We've been very successful because we've adhered to the Constitution. And that is what sets us apart. But our representative government is for the people, by the people, and of the people. And that is very, very unique in the annals of history. But what makes this government, why I say I'm a constitutionalist, and you can probably hear it in the language that I'm speaking, but what makes me a constitutionalist is I believe that the founders were so brilliant that they foresaw all of the pitfalls and pratfalls that we were going to fall into, and they built this government to withstand and be transcendent and objective over time. It's not a document that is malleable and fluid, and we can put a 21st century postmodern filter over it and expect it to work, because the minute you put that 21st century template over the Constitution, you have to cut pieces away from it because it doesn't fit, it doesn't work. But the minute you start carving pieces out and your views change, because postmodernism is in flux continuously, that means that the Constitution will be in flux continuously. That is not a way to govern, in my opinion. So what the founders did that was brilliant was they took three branches of government and they pitted them against each other. Because, John, what's amazing about the founders is they knew something about people that we know, but we often forget when it comes to government. Human nature. And they knew that human nature was going to take effect, and it was going to rear its ugly head, as it always does. Milton Friedman was asked about capitalism, and Phil Donahue was talking to him about capitalism. He's like, capitalism breeds greed and corruption and all of this, and there's no virtues. And Milton Friedman looked at him and says, are you telling me that socialism, there's not greed? In communism, there's not greed? In every form of government, there is greed. But what makes the U.S. Constitution and makes the U.S. government so amazing is they built in for the greed. They built in for human ambition, and they created the separation of powers. Each branch is equally powerful to stop the other branch from impeding. And that's what makes it amazing. And so imagine with me, if you will, quickly, that you have a three-dimensional triangle made out of three lines, and the center of it is open. So you have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of government. And they connect, one on a 90-degree angle and two on 45-degree angles, because it equals 180 degrees. That's geometry inside of a triangle.
Good job,
so,
Wes.
thank you. I got an A in geometry in high school. So, but inside of that triangle, there is something called, that I refer to as the liberty zone. And this is where government cannot impede. This is the inalienable rights that was given to us because of our Creator. They were self-evident. And so inside that liberty zone, they took government and pushed it back and said, you cannot come in here because this person has rights that are given by God. They exist, and thereby they have these rights. So that is why that I believe in individualism over collectivism. And I believe that we look at the individual, and individuals responsible for individual, because each of us is made in the image of God, and each of us has individual inherent worth. The founding fathers didn't give that to us. They simply acknowledged that it was there. And in acknowledging that it was there, they pushed government out and says, the government shall make no law to infringe upon this. The government shall make no law to infringe upon this. The government shall make no law, and they blocked it off so that we would have room to breathe and prosper and be in the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's why that I'm a constitutionalist. I think that the constitutionalist has the better view, because we don't add things to the Constitution. We don't add rights, and we don't add services and goods and things like that. We simply push government out of the way to allow us as individuals to excel.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, I would 100% agree. One thing we were discussing earlier was, this historical moment where Elizabeth Warren had this statement about people who build things and who accomplish things. And I'm actually going to pull up the quote right now. But she says, there is nobody in this country who got rich on their own. Nobody. You built a factory out there. Good for you. But I want to be clear. You moved your goods to market on roads the rest of us paid for. You hired workers the rest of us paid to educate. You were safe in your factory because of police forces and fire forces that the rest of us paid for. You didn't have to worry that marauding bands would come and seize everything at your factory. Now look, you built a factory and it turned into something terrific or a great idea. God bless. Keep a hunk of it, but part of the underlying social contract is you take a hunk of that and pay forward for the next kid who comes along. So I kind of wanted to just, I agree with everything that Wes just said. I kind of wanted to just talk a little bit about that sort of perspective as far as what the government's role should be in our society, especially from an economic point of view. And what she's saying there is that the government should basically make regulations that cause everyone to give back a certain amount in order to ultimately provide for everyone else. And so, I'm a small business owner, and I apologize again, I'm not extremely politically minded. Wes is the guru, not me. But I'm a small business owner, and so I love business. I love everything about it. I study it. It's my passion. And, this quote really hits home for me in a somewhat negative light. And the thing is, I totally understand what she's saying because it's the mindset of, it takes a village. And I think that there is a context for that. And it's, we want to be very grateful for the other people who serve and who do things that allow us to have freedom and to achieve our dreams. But, I think what's interesting about this quote and what's interesting about human nature is that no one really invents or discovers or builds something specifically because they want to serve the government or because they want to serve other people and help all of their dreams come true. At the end of the day, people do jobs, and that's in quotes, because they're told to, but people fulfill their dreams and they reach goals and they reach new heights because they have the freedom to. And, it's my perspective that the role of the government should not be to continue to implement programs to help people, but that they should continue to serve people and enable people to thrive. One kind of a funny example is that in business, oftentimes you'll see that you see a lot of micromanagement. That's one of the major problems in businesses these days is, there's so many managers and they want to have control over everything.
TPS reports. Yeah,
TPS reports, if you've seen the movie Office Space. It's an amazing movie, except for the language. And but what's interesting is that there's studies that show that when a manager will leave and go on vacation, that they'll come back a week or two later and find that the employees, because they actually had the emotional space and the freedom to do what they wanted to do and to reach the goals they wanted to reach and to solve the problems that they saw, the business would actually be running better than when the manager was there. And so I kind of take the same philosophy when it comes to the role of the government, especially in business, is that just let people do what they do. Let people solve the problems and let people have the emotional space to do things, and I think it's amazing what can happen.
I completely agree with that. I know that's hard to imagine. But what you said there was they have the space. They have the space to create those things. And it's amazing what the founders did with the negative rights. Because so what we have here, we have with Bernie, we have with Obama and the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, we have government getting into every area of our lives and making it a point to make restrictions on our lives. And what the founders did was that's called a positive right. When you take a good or a service and you say the government has to do this for you, that's called a positive right, and actually has a negative effect. In my opinion, it has a negative effect because the government then is beholden to do this thing for you, and you're also beholden by something. I mean, think about this for a minute. I said this when the ACA, or lovingly referred to as Obamacare, came into effect. It's amazing that the government can force you to buy a product simply because you exist. And what's more interesting is the 31 million people that it was supposed to give insurance to, there are exactly 31 million people that are still uninsured. And I just go, it's just a different 31 million. They could have done something else. They could have given, it cost $1 billion to build Obamacare website. They could have given every person in the United States $2 million in an HSA and says, here, that's all you need for the rest of your life, $2 million, and it'll gain interest. And it would have been cheaper and save taxpayers money. So what I'm saying is the negative rights, what they do is they teach you how to fish. They say the government is out of your way, spread your wings. It's like this as well. I actually homeschool my kids. Some of you are probably cringing at that going, oh my gosh, this guy's homeschooling his kids. But I homeschool my kids, and I have to teach my daughter very differently. I have to teach Eliana very differently than I do Alexander. Why? Because they learn at different rates in different ways. If they were going to a public school, they would not get that individual attention. But I understand how each of them learn now, and so I give them ability to do things like my little girl loves to draw. So I allow her to draw as part of her curriculum. And when I see she's not doing something that we're supposed to be doing, I find a way to get her to engage in it, and I give her freedom. And it's amazing the things that she will come up with in that arena. We as individuals can do that as well. There's actually something called unschooling. Have you ever heard of that? Where they actually don't have schooling. And kids teach themselves to read. And actually, there's one school, there was 500 kids, 85% of them made it to college. And you look at that, why? Because they took the initiative. It was on them. They took the initiative, and they went forward. I also know stories of guys, an Indian guy who came over with 25 cents in his pocket. He came over with 25 cents in his pocket. And 20 years later, around his dinner table, his kids were doctors, engineers, lawyers, and all that. Why? Because he changed poverty for himself by coming to a country that tells the government to get out of the way and allow them to prosper and go forward. The negative rights force the government out of our lives so that we can reach new heights. And I think that is extremely important, and we don't need to forget that. And so the Constitution is not antiquated. It's not irrelevant. It actually needs to be adhered to more so than it is, and we don't need to strip away. We're not smarter than the framers. I can tell you that right now.
Well, Wes, we're kind of running out of time. I do want to get to one other question really quick. And, we're both Christians here, and I do, for the Christian listeners out there, I do want to address the question, does the Bible actually say anything about this topic? Does it have a perspective to offer?
I don't think the Bible has a perspective to offer, simply because it doesn't give any grounds for how to build government or how to run government. And the Bible certainly doesn't say anything about the United States of America. What it says is, Paul says you need to pray for your leaders. And when they asked Jesus actually said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And so I would say that the Bible has no bearing on it, except that you take the fundamentals you learned from Christ and you live your life through Christ. And you want people who emulate those values to govern you. And I think in that we pull from our heart and we pull from our worldview, and we say, this is the kind of government that we want to have. And we control that. And I'd just like to say quickly that if we as Christians don't do anything, there were 54 million Christians who stayed home from voting last year. 54 million. Do you know if everybody voted, that we would win the election? If every Christian voted, whoever they voted for would win the election. 54 million votes. So if we stay home and our rights and our religious liberties, if they fall away, we have no one to blame but ourselves. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. And so we need to be stronger and stand up for our rights. And because in this country, we can stand up for our rights. We have a voice. We have a government that will allow us to have grievances. If we allow them to take that away, then we have no one to blame but ourselves.
Well, Wes, I've honestly been kind of waiting for you to get passionate about something. I mean, if you could, tame it down a little bit.
I'm unapologetic.
Yeah. So another question is, voting season is coming up. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to sift through the different approaches that they could take to the voting process?
I would say listen to the language. I would say go to their websites, search them out, look them out. It takes discipline. Again, look at all the candidates. When you hear them say something that you agree with, check it out and say, could I be wrong on this? Sift through it and actually do the homework. Talk to your friends. Talk to your family. Say, hey, I like this person. What do you think? And take into consideration the things that they're talking about. For me, for my money is on Ted Cruz. And the reason is because I've watched him over the last 3 years. I even watched him on C-SPAN. Now, who watches C-SPAN? I would watch Senate floor hearings and watch him on C-SPAN. He has been consistent. He has studied the Constitution. He actually has won 9 Supreme Court cases about the Constitution. So for me, there's no question that's who I think is the best candidate. But I expect you to do your legwork and do your homework yourself and figure out who you want to vote for. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for tonight on this. We'll do some Q&A here in a minute. If anybody has any questions for us, you can call in or text. If you want to text one of us or call in on Skype, we'll have that available for you. We'll take a question and answer period for the next 20 or 30 minutes here. It's been great. A lot of fun, guys. Thanks everyone for coming out. And all the listeners out there, thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. Goodbye. And we'll see you next time.